Watch what happens when a reckless rebel group makes the fatal mistake of disrespecting a veterans cemetery, unaware that the quiet war widow tending to the graves holds a devastating secret that will shatter their world. Tonight's story shows how Rebecca Thorne, a Gold Star wife who lost everything in service to her country, transforms from their intended victim into an unstoppable force of justice, revealing a shocking connection that will make these rebels question everything they thought they knew about power and respect. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery, where Rebecca Thorne followed her daily ritual. Her delicate hands, calloused from years of tending to the grounds, moved methodically between the white marble headstones, each touch a testament to promises kept. 15 years as a military wife had taught her about duty, but it was her husband's sacrifice that taught her about honor. The late March wind carried the scent of fresh rain as she knelt beside a particular headstone, wiping morning dew from the polished stone. Captain Michael Thorne, her husband, had served with distinction before making the ultimate sacrifice in a classified operation 5 years ago. Rebecca traced his name with trembling fingers, remembering the vow she'd made at his funeral to preserve not just his memory, but the dignity of every service member laid to rest in these hallowed grounds. Mrs. Thorne, a gruff voice cut through her thoughts. Master Sergeant Frank Callahan, the 68-year-old former Force Recon Marine who'd become the cemetery's unofficial guardian, approached with barely contained urgency. His weathered hands gripped his maintenance cart's steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. "We've got trouble. The rebels just broke through the east gate." Rebecca straightened, her heart quickening, though her expression remained serene. The rebels had been making headlines lately, and not the good kind. What had once been a group of thrill-seeking youth had transformed under new leadership into something darker, more destructive. Their new leader, Derek Chaos Blackwood, had been systematically vandalizing sacred sites across the county, leaving broken monuments and shattered peace in his wake. The distant roar of motorcycles grew louder, like an approaching storm. Rebecca could see Frank's jaw clenching, decades of military discipline barely containing his anger. "Get inside the office," he urged, but Rebecca stood her ground. This was more than just a cemetery to her. It was a sanctuary of memories, a place where heroes rested, where families came to remember and heal. She wouldn't be chased away. 5 motorcycles burst around the curve of Valor Drive, their engines shattering the sacred morning silence. Chaos led the pack, his leather jacket adorned with patches that spoke of destruction rather than respect. Behind him rode his crew: Hammer Harrison, built like a tank with fists to match; Rook Rivers, whose calculating eyes missed nothing; Apex Andrews, with a reputation for explosive violence; and a younger rider Rebecca hadn't seen before, whose uncertain posture seemed at odds with the others. Well, Chaos called out, cutting his engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise. "Looks like we found ourselves a grieving widow playing gardener." His voice carried the kind of mockery that made Rebecca's spine stiffen with cold fury. "This is sacred ground," Rebecca replied, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had helped her through countless military ceremonies and deployments. "Show some respect." Chaos's laugh echoed across the cemetery, bouncing off headstones like bullets. "Sacred ground? Sweetheart, everything's just a canvas if you look at it right. And this," he gestured broadly at the immaculately maintained grounds, "this is going to be our perfect playground." Frank stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite his years. "You're out of line, Blackwood. Way out of line." "Am I?" Chaos dismounted, his boots crunching on gravel as he approached Rebecca. He towered over her, using his height to intimidate. "See, I've been watching this place. Quiet, isolated, full of fancy marble just begging for some creative expression. And what's one little widow going to do about it?" What Chaos didn't know, couldn't know, was that Rebecca Thorne wasn't just any military widow. As the founder of the local Gold Star Family Support Group and a liaison between military families and Veterans Affairs, She had earned the respect of every service member and veteran in 3 states. Her quiet strength had guided countless families through their darkest hours. Her gentle hands had held those of dying veterans as they shared their final stories, and her unwavering dedication had built a network of support that spread far beyond these cemetery gates. "Boys, want to know what I'm going to do?" Rebecca's voice remained calm but carried an edge of steel that made even Hammer shift uncomfortably on his bike. "I'm going to stand right here, where my husband and countless others gave everything for the freedom you're abusing. And I'm going to remind you that every single one of these headstones represents someone who showed more courage in one moment than you have in your entire life." Chaos's smirk faltered for just a moment, replaced by something darker. "Brave words, widow, but words won't stop what's coming." He turned to his crew, spreading his arms wide. "Boys, I think it's time we show this little lady exactly how the rebels handle resistance." The rebels dismounted, forming a loose circle around Rebecca and Frank, the morning sun catching the glint of spray paint cans and marking tools in their hands. Some wore brass knuckles, a clear sign they came prepared for more than just vandalism. The younger one hesitated, his movements uncertain as he glanced between Rebecca and his leader. Rebecca didn't back down. She had faced far worse than playground bullies with spray paint. She'd stood steady while receiving a folded flag at her husband's funeral, had maintained her composure through 21 gun salutes, had learned that true strength often came wrapped in the quietest packages. These men, with their loud machines and louder threats, had no idea what real power looked like. But first, she would need to survive the next few minutes, armed with nothing but her wits, her courage, and a secret that would change everything, if she lived long enough to reveal it. The fate of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery, and perhaps something far more precious, hung in the balance of what would happen next. The tension in the morning air thickened as Chaos took another step toward Rebecca, his boots scraping against the hallowed ground. The sound felt like fingernails on a chalkboard to her ears, each step a deliberate desecration of this sacred space. Behind her, Frank's hands tightened on the maintenance cart's steering wheel, years of military discipline warring with the instinct to protect. "You know what I see here?" Chaos swept his arm across the rows of white marble headstones. "I see a bunch of rocks that need some color, some life. Maybe a few skulls, some flames." He pulled a spray can from his jacket, the metallic rattle echoing off the quiet graves. "What do you think, boys? Where should we start?" "The memorial wall," Hammer suggested, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. "All that blank space just begging for our signature." He lifted his own can, shaking it with anticipation. Rook Rivers moved like a predator circling around to flank them. "Now, I say we start with the flagpole. Nothing sends a message like a desecrated flag." His calculating eyes never left Rebecca's face, watching for any sign of weakness. Apex Andrews cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the morning quiet. "Why choose? We've got plenty of time and plenty of paint." He reached into his backpack, pulling out more cans. "This place is going to be famous after we're done with it." The younger member of their group hung back, his discomfort growing more visible with each passing moment. Rebecca noticed how his eyes kept darting to a particular section of the cemetery, though he tried to hide it. There was something in his bearing, in the way he carried himself, that seemed hauntingly familiar. "You don't want to do this," Rebecca said, her voice carrying across the space between them. "This isn't just a collection of stones. Each one tells a story. Each one represents a life given in service, a family left behind, a sacrifice made for something greater than themselves." Chaos laughed, but there was an edge to it now. "Save the sermon, widow. Your husband's dead, and no amount of gardening or preaching is going to bring him back. Time to face reality. Nothing here matters anymore." Rebecca's voice remained steady as she took a step forward. "You're wrong. Everything here matters. Like this grave, here." She moved to a nearby headstone, her movements deliberate. "Staff Sergeant James Rivers. Died saving his entire squad in Kandahar. I was there when his family received the news, held his mother's hand during the ceremony. Rook's spray can lowered slightly, the name striking a chord. How did you? Or this one, Rebecca continued, moving to another marker. Private First Class William Harrison lost both legs to an IED, spent his last days mentoring wounded warriors at Walter Reed, never lost his smile, never gave up helping others. Hammer's massive frame stiffened, recognition flickering across his face. And here, Rebecca's voice grew softer as she approached a newer headstone, one that the young rebel couldn't seem to stop glancing at. Lieutenant Daniel Blackwood, killed in action 3 years ago. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His son wasn't at the funeral. Nobody knew where to find him. The young rebel's face went pale, and chaos spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance. "Nathan," he growled, "get back on your bike. Now." But Nathan Blackwood, son of a fallen hero, stood frozen, staring at his father's grave with a mixture of pain and shame written across his young face. The spray can slipped from his fingers, clattering against the ground in the sudden silence. Rebecca watched the transformation happening before her. She had attended hundreds of military funerals, had consoled countless families, had learned to read the signs of buried grief and hidden connections. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a picture far more complex than simple vandalism. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the graves as the standoff continued. What had begun as an act of desecration was transforming into something else entirely, a moment of reckoning that would force everyone present to confront truths they'd tried to bury. "Because that's what I do," Rebecca replied, her voice gaining strength. "While you've been planning to desecrate these grounds, I've been here every day learning their stories, preserving their memories, helping their families find peace. Every name here is more than just letters carved in stone. They're promises we made to never forget their sacrifice." She turned to Nathan, whose eyes remained fixed on his father's grave. "Your father wrote you letters, you know. Every deployment, every mission. He never gave up hoping you'd find your way back." She reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out a weathered envelope. "This was his last one. I've carried it every day, hoping I'd find you." Nathan's hands trembled as he reached for the letter, but chaos stepped between them. "This is some kind of trick," he snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. "Nathan, don't listen to her. She's trying to manipulate you." "Like you've been manipulating him?" Frank spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of authority that only decades of military service could provide. "Turning a grieving son against everything his father died protecting? That's a special kind of low, even for someone like you." The other rebels shifted uncomfortably, their earlier bravado cracking under the weight of revelation. Hammer stared at the grave of William Harrison, memories clearly playing across his face. Rook couldn't seem to look away from his uncle's headstone, while Apex's usual aggression had melted into uncertainty. "You don't understand," Chaos began, but Rebecca cut him off. "I understand more than you think, Derek Blackwood," she said quietly, watching his face pale at the use of his real name. "I understand that you were Daniel's best friend in high school, that you promised to look after his family if anything happened to him, that instead of keeping that promise, you've been leading his son down a path that dishonors everything his father lived and died for." The morning had grown warmer, the mist burning away to reveal the cemetery in stark clarity. The rebels' leather jackets and tough guy posturing seemed suddenly hollow against the backdrop of marble monuments to real courage and sacrifice. Nathan took a step toward his father's grave, then another, moving as if in a trance. The letter in Rebecca's hand seemed to pull him forward, a bridge across the years of anger and loss that had led him to this moment. Behind him, his fellow rebels watched in silence, their own facades crumbling in the face of undeniable truth. The next few moments would determine not just the fate of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery, but the futures of everyone present. Rebecca had faced down grief, loss, and despair in these grounds, had helped countless others find their way back from darkness. Now she stood ready to do it again, armed with the most powerful weapons she possessed: truth, memory, and the unwavering strength of a promise kept. Reality twisted around them like a tightening coil as Nathan reached for the letter with trembling hands. The morning sun caught the metal studs on his leather jacket, no longer looking rebellious but instead like armor worn to protect a wounded heart. "Your father wrote this 3 days before his last mission," Rebecca explained softly, her eyes never leaving Nathan's face. "He knew the risks were high. He wanted to make sure you had his words, his love, even if—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. "Don't," Chaos growled, but his voice had lost its edge of command. "Nathan, this isn't what we're here for. Remember what they did to you? How they just sent a letter when your old man died? How nobody came looking?" "I did," Rebecca interrupted, her quiet voice carrying more authority than Chaos's shouts ever could. "I went to every address we had. Your grandmother didn't know where you'd gone. Your school had no forwarding contact. I kept searching, kept asking, kept hoping. Because that's what we do for our fallen heroes' families. We never stop trying." Nathan unfolded the letter with shaking fingers, his father's familiar handwriting emerging from the creases like a ghost taking form. The other rebels unconsciously moved closer, drawn by the raw emotion of the moment. "Read it," Frank encouraged, his gruff voice gentler now. "Your father's words deserve to be heard in this place." Nathan's voice cracked as he began to read. "Dear Nathan, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it home. But son, you need to know, every mission, every deployment, every risk I took was to make sure you'd have a safer world. I've watched you struggle since your mom passed, watched you pull away, but I never stopped believing in the man you could become." Chaos took a step back, his facade cracking further. Hammer removed his brass knuckles, letting them fall to the ground with a dull thud. Rook's calculating expression had been replaced by something closer to shame. "I know you're angry," Nathan continued reading, his voice growing stronger. "Angry at the military, at the world, at me. But son, anger's like a fire. It'll burn everything good inside you if you let it. There's a better way. There's always a better way." Rebecca watched as the words worked their magic, breaking down walls that violence and threats never could. She had seen this transformation before, the moment when grief's hard shell finally cracked, allowing healing to begin. "The letter goes on," she said gently, when Nathan's voice failed him. "He wrote about his hopes for you, his memories of teaching you to ride your first bike, his dreams of the man you'd become. He never lost faith in you, Nathan. Even at the end." Apex shifted uneasily, looking at his spray cans as if they'd suddenly become radioactive. The young rebel who'd arrived ready to desecrate heroes' graves was beginning to understand exactly what that would have meant. "You said you knew my uncle," Rook spoke up suddenly, looking at Staff Sergeant Rivers's grave. What was he like? They never told us much about how he died." Rebecca's eyes softened with memory. "He was a hero, the kind of leader who put his men first, always. That last day in Kandahar he could have saved himself. Instead, he went back for his wounded radio operator, carried him a quarter-mile under heavy fire." The sun climbed higher as more stories emerged, each one breaking down another layer of the rebels' misguided anger. Frank added his own memories, speaking of brothers lost, of courage under fire, of sacrifices that couldn't be understood until you'd seen them firsthand. Nathan sank to his knees beside his father's grave, one hand touching the cold marble while the other clutched the letter like a lifeline. The contrast between who he'd arrived as and who he was becoming grew sharper with each passing moment. The transformation had begun, but its outcome still hung in the balance. The next few minutes would determine whether these young men would choose to honor the heroes resting beneath their feet or continue down their path of destruction. Rebecca stood ready, knowing that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happened not on battlefields, but in moments of choice like this. "Tell me more about them," Nathan said suddenly, his voice thick with emotion. "The heroes buried here, the ones you visit every day, the ones we—" He couldn't finish the sentence, shame coloring his features as he looked at the spray paint can lying abandoned on the sacred ground. Rebecca moved with quiet purpose between the headstones, her knowledge of each soul resting beneath them as intimate as family. "Over here lies Master Sergeant David Cooper," she began, leading them to a grave adorned with fresh flowers. "He trained over 300 Special Forces operators, saved countless lives with his expertise. I still get letters from his students, sharing stories of how he changed their lives." Chaos, or Derek, as his mask of intimidation continued to crack, found his eyes drawn to a particular section of graves. Rebecca noticed his gaze and walked there deliberately. "You recognize some of these names, don't you, Derek?" His jaw tightened, but he couldn't look away. "The varsity football team," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Class of 2008. They all enlisted together after graduation. Your teammates," Rebecca confirmed. "Your brothers once, before you chose a different path." She gestured to the row of headstones, each marking a young life given in service. "They spoke of you, you know. Even after you disappeared, they remembered the leader you used to be." Hammer moved closer to a grave that seemed to call to him. "William Harrison," he read aloud. "He was my cousin. I stopped visiting after I joined the rebels. Thought I was too tough for family obligations." "He asked about you," Rebecca said softly. "Even in his final days at Walter Reed, he kept your picture by his bed, said you were the strongest person he knew, not because of your size, but because of your heart." Rook had found his uncle's grave, fingers tracing the engraved letters with newfound reverence. "I was just a kid when he died. Nobody would tell me how it happened. They said I was too young to understand." "Understanding comes with time," Frank interjected, his weathered face softening. "And sometimes, son, it comes with being ready to hear the truth." Apex stood apart, struggling with his own demons. "My brother's here somewhere," he admitted finally. "Never been to his grave. Couldn't face it. Thought if I caused enough trouble, made enough noise, the pain would go away." "Pain doesn't go away," Rebecca said, walking to him. "But it can transform into something meaningful, something that honors their sacrifice instead of trying to bury it." The morning had bloomed into full day, the sun now high enough to eliminate shadows, leaving nowhere for pretense to hide. The rebels' fearsome reputation seemed to dissolve in the harsh light of truth and memory. Nathan still held his father's letter, reading and rereading certain passages as if trying to absorb every word. "He knew," he said suddenly. "He knew he might not come back, but he went anyway. Why?" "Because some things are worth dying for," Frank answered, standing tall despite his years. "And some things are worth living for. The question is, son, which path will you choose?" The weight of the moment pressed down on all of them, the choice between destruction and redemption hanging in the balance. Rebecca watched as each young man wrestled with their conscience, with their pain, with the reality of what they'd almost done to this sacred place. The transformation was beginning, but its direction wasn't yet certain. The next moments would determine whether these lost souls would find their way back to honor or sink deeper into their self-made darkness. Rebecca had seen such moments before, had guided many through the valley of decision that lay between grief and healing. What happened next would change everything, not just for the rebels, but for every soul resting in Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery. The path to redemption was opening before them, but they would have to choose to take the first step. Each grave in Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery told a story, but the one unfolding now among its hallowed grounds carried the potential for redemption. Eleanor Martinez's car pulled up to the gates, her arrival timed by a concerned call Frank had managed to make during the confrontation. As the Gold Star Mother's leader stepped out of her vehicle, her presence commanded immediate attention. "I thought I might find trouble here," she said, her voice carrying across the morning air. Her eyes moved from Rebecca to the rebels, taking in the scene with a mother's understanding. "When I heard about vandals targeting the cemetery, I made some calls. Seems I wasn't the only one who remembered who some of you used to be." The rumble of approaching vehicles broke the tension. A convoy of cars and trucks began arriving. Veterans, military families, and active duty service members, all responding to an unspoken call to protect their sacred ground. They formed a loose semicircle, their presence both protective and purposeful. Among them was Colonel William Parker, his service dress uniform immaculate, his combat ribbons telling stories of battles fought and brothers lost. "Derek Blackwood," he called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "Last time I saw you, you were wearing a different kind of uniform, one that stood for something." Chaos. Derek stiffened, recognition flashing across his face. Colonel Parker. First period. "You were going to enlist," the colonel continued, moving forward with measured steps. "Right after graduation, with your teammates. I wrote your recommendation letter myself. Then you disappeared." Nathan looked at his rebel leader with new eyes. "You were going to serve?" "That was a lifetime ago," Derek snapped, but the bravado in his voice had hollowed out. "Before I understood how pointless it all was." "Pointless?" Eleanor stepped forward, her gold star pin catching the sunlight. "Is that what you really believe? Or just what you tell yourself to justify what you've become?" She reached into her purse, withdrawing a folded photograph. "I kept this, hoping someday you'd remember." The photo showed a younger Derek in his high school football uniform, surrounded by teammates who now rested beneath the cemetery's marble markers. His arm was around Daniel Blackwood, Nathan's father, both of them grinning with the invincible optimism of youth. "They believed in you," Eleanor continued softly. "All of them. Even after you turned your back on everything you once stood for." More vehicles arrived. Members of the local veterans of foreign wars, the American Legion, military families who had lost loved ones. Each arrival carried not threats but memories, not weapons, but witnesses to the people these young rebels had once been. Rebecca watched the transformation continuing in the faces of the rebels. Hammer couldn't meet the eyes of his cousin's widow. Rook stood straighter as his uncle's former commanding officer approached. Apex's tough guy facade crumbled when his sister-in-law emerged from the gathering crowd, carrying his nephew, the spitting image of the brother he'd been afraid to mourn. "When did we lose our way?" Derek asked, more to himself than anyone else. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years wasted, paths not taken, honor forgotten. The morning sun had risen fully now, casting no shadows to hide behind. The gathered community stood witness to a moment of choice, not just for the rebels, but for everyone present. This was about more than preventing vandalism. It was about reclaiming lost souls, about remembering who they were meant to be. Colonel Parker moved to stand beside Nathan, who still clutched his father's letter. "Your dad believed in second chances," he said quietly. "Believed that it's never too late to choose a different path. The question is, do you believe that too?" The transformation hung in the balance as the rebels faced their moment of truth, surrounded by the very community they'd planned to disrespect. The next few moments would determine not just the fate of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery, but the future of souls both living and departed. Derek looked down at his leather jacket, adorned with patches meant to intimidate rather than honor. His fingers traced the rebels' insignia, the meaning of rebellion suddenly feeling hollow against the backdrop of true courage surrounding him. "I was supposed to ship out with them," he said, his voice barely audible. "The night before we were going to sign our papers together, I got the call about my sister's accident." "I remember," Colonel Parker said quietly. "Sarah's crash. You became her primary caregiver." Nathan's head snapped up, this piece of information casting his leader in an entirely new light. Derek continued, each word seeming to physically pain him. "Couldn't leave her, but I was too proud to tell them why I didn't show up. Too ashamed, easier to just disappear. Start acting like I never wanted it anyway." Rebecca moved forward, her understanding of the situation deepening. "Your sister. She's at the VA Rehabilitation Center now, isn't she? I've seen you there, though you always left before anyone could approach you." The gathered crowd remained respectfully silent as Derek struggled with his response. "Every Wednesday. Been taking her for physical therapy for 10 years. Never missed a session." His tough guy facade cracked further. "The staff there. They never judged, never asked questions. Just helped her every single time. Eleanor Martinez stepped closer, the photograph still in her hand. That's what real strength looks like, Derek. Not destroying things, but building them. Not running from responsibility, but embracing it. Hammer spoke up, his massive frame seeming to shrink with realization. We've been following you for years, boss. Thought we were rebels with a cause. But we've just been helping you hide, haven't we? All this time, Rook added, looking at his uncle's grave. We thought we were fighting against the system, but we were just fighting ourselves. Apex couldn't take his eyes off his nephew, seeing his lost brother's features in the child's face. We chose the easy way, he said. Being angry is easier than being hurt. Being destructive is easier than dealing with loss. Colonel Parker's voice carried across the gathering. The men and women resting here chose the hard path. They faced their fears, accepted their responsibilities, gave everything for something bigger than themselves. Nathan, still holding his father's letter, finally spoke. Dad's last words to me. He wrote about choices, about how the hardest ones are usually the right ones. He looked at Derek. You've been making hard choices all along, haven't you? Just not the ones we could see. The morning had grown warmer, the gathered community creating a circle of support around the transformation taking place. Frank stood by his maintenance cart, watching years of pain and misunderstanding begin to unravel. It's never too late, Rebecca said, her voice gentle but firm. Every person resting here believed in something bigger than themselves, believed in second chances, in redemption, in the power of choosing right over easy. Derek looked at his crew. Not rebels now, but lost boys finding their way home. Then he looked at Nathan, seeing in him the son of his best friend, the legacy of a promise broken but not beyond repair. Finally, his eyes swept across the gathered veterans, families, and supporters, seeing not judgment but understanding. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, his voice cracking. Don't know how to make up for what we almost did, what we've been doing. Eleanor stepped forward, maternal instinct overriding all else. You start by remembering who you were meant to be. Then you take one step at a time, surrounded by people who understand the journey. The transformation was becoming visible now, as tangible as the morning light that illuminated the sacred grounds. The rebels stood at a crossroads, their past and potential future stretching out before them like diverging paths. The choice they made in the next few moments would ripple through not just their lives, but through the entire community gathered around them. The sacred ground of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery had become more than just a battleground. It had become a place of rebirth. Your sister, Rebecca said thoughtfully. She's not just receiving physical therapy at the VA, is she? She's been helping other patients. The staff tells me about a woman in a wheelchair who spends hours encouraging new arrivals, showing them that recovery is possible. Derek's eyes widened with surprise. You know about that? Sarah never lost faith in you, Colonel Parker added. Every time I visited the VA, she'd tell me, my brother's going to find his way back, he's just taking the long road home. The gathering had grown larger as more community members arrived. Among them were veterans wearing the badges of law enforcement, teachers who had taught the rebels in school, coaches who remembered their potential. Each arrival added another thread to the web of connection that had always existed, even when they'd tried to deny it. The warehouse you were planning to use as your new headquarters, Frank said, his voice gruff with emotion. It used to be a meeting place for veterans. Before budget cuts, before everything fell apart. Place where soldiers could find help, where families could connect, where healing happened. Hammer looked at the building in the distance with new eyes. It's still solid. Good bones. Just needs some work. Like us, Rook said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Just needs someone to care enough to rebuild it. Nathan folded his father's letter carefully, tucking it into his jacket pocket near his heart. Dad wrote about legacy, about how each generation has a choice to either honor or squander what was built before them, I think. I think we've been squandering long enough. The morning sun had reached its full strength, illuminating the gathered crowd, the sacred grounds, and the small group of young men standing at the crossroads of who they were and who they could become. The transformation hung in the balance, but the scales were tipping toward redemption. Apex looked at his abandoned spray cans, then at his nephew, then at his brother's grave. "Sometimes the hardest rebellion is against who you've become," he said, wisdom unexpected from one so young. "Sometimes the bravest thing is admitting you were wrong." The choice before them was clear now, illuminated by truth, memory, and the unwavering support of a community they'd never truly lost. The next steps they took would determine not just their own futures, but the legacy they would leave for others to follow. Derek took a deep breath, looking first at his crew, then at Nathan, and finally at the gathered community. The morning light caught his face, revealing not the hardened rebel leader, but the young man who had once dreamed of serving alongside his brothers. "The warehouse," he said, his voice finding new strength. "You said it used to help veterans?" He turned to Frank, decades of military bearing recognizing each other across the divide of years and choices. "Was a good place," Frank confirmed. "Had counseling services, job training, support groups, place where veterans could feel understood, where families could find help, where nobody had to carry their burdens alone." Colonel Parker stepped forward, his presence commanding but compassionate. "It's still zoned for community service. The county's been looking for someone to rehabilitate it, put it back into service. Just needs the right people with the right motivation. People who understand both sides," Eleanor added thoughtfully, "who know what it's like to be lost and found, who can bridge the gap between rebellion and redemption." The rebels exchanged glances, years of synchronized movements now reflecting something deeper than mere gang coordination. Hammer spoke first, his massive frame straightening with purpose. "I know construction. Did it before all this. Could assess the structural needs." "I've got contacts in the trades," Rook added, his calculating mind already shifting from destruction to creation. "People who'd help, if they knew it was for veterans." Apex looked at his sister-in-law and nephew, years of avoided responsibility settling on his shoulders. "My brother, he was good with computers. Taught me everything he knew. Could set up a proper system for tracking services, coordinating volunteers." Nathan stood straighter, his father's letter a tangible reminder of legacy in his pocket. "Dad's life insurance. I never touched it. Never wanted to. But this would be something he'd be proud of." Rebecca watched the transformation continuing, seeing how each piece was falling into place. "The VA's been looking for satellite locations," she offered. "Places closer to where veterans live. Easier access to services, especially for those with mobility issues." "Like Sarah?" Derek said softly, then stronger. "Like my sister. She's been helping others at the VA, maybe. Maybe it's time I followed her example." The gathered community began offering support. A retired contractor volunteered to help with permits. A local business owner promised supplies. Veterans organizations pledged volunteer hours and expertise. "It won't be easy," Colonel Parker warned. "Redemption never is. You'll face skepticism, resistance. Some won't believe you've changed." "Good thing we're used to fighting," Hammer said, then quickly added, "Fighting for something worthwhile this time." Eleanor stepped forward, still holding the old photograph. "Every person resting here fought for something bigger than themselves. Believed in the possibility of a better world. Maybe that's your real rebellion, proving that change is possible, that it's never too late to choose a different path." The morning had warmed fully now, the sacred grounds of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery witnessing another kind of sacrifice. The laying down of false identities, the surrender of misguided anger, the first steps toward redemption. "We'll need help," Derek admitted, humility replacing arrogance. "Need guidance, mentorship, need people who understand both the military world and the civilian one. You'll have it," Rebecca assured him, her voice carrying the same strength that had faced down their threats earlier. This community, these families, these veterans, these supporters, they understand the journey from loss to purpose better than anyone. Frank leaned on his maintenance cart, decades of military wisdom in his weathered face. The hardest mission is the one that changes who you are. Takes more courage to admit you're wrong than to keep pretending you're right. The transformation was visible now in every face, every posture, every quiet acknowledgement of truth. The rebels stood straighter, their leather jackets no longer armor against the world, but uniforms of a different kind of service. Nathan looked at his father's grave, then at the community surrounding them. "Dad wrote about finding your way home," he said. "About how sometimes the longest journey is the one that leads you back to who you were meant to be." There, the sacred grounds of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery had become more than a battleground, or even a place of redemption. It had become a launching point for a new kind of mission, one that would require every bit of strength, courage, and dedication they possessed. The next steps they took would determine not just their own futures, but the futures of countless veterans and families who needed exactly what they were uniquely positioned to provide: understanding from those who had walked both paths, hope from those who had found their way back, strength from those who had learned the true meaning of rebellion. The transformation from rebel group to community servants began not with grand gestures, but with simple acts of respect. That very afternoon, the group that had arrived intending destruction instead began restoration. Their first task was removing evidence of earlier vandalism from other sites. Their knowledge of graffiti now turned toward preservation rather than destruction. "Start with the memorial wall," Derek directed, his voice carrying a new kind of authority. "Well, we know how to remove tags without damaging the surface, yeah?" He looked at Colonel Parker, seeking approval instead of trying to inspire fear. "We've got the right solvents in our bikes. Used to carry them too. Well, for different reasons." The colonel nodded, understanding the unspoken admission. "Put that knowledge to good use. Show them what you can really do." The rebels worked with focused intensity, their leather jackets shed in the warming day, revealing the ordinary young men beneath. Hammer's strength, once used to intimidate, now carefully supported damaged memorial plaques, while others restored them. Rook's eye for detail, previously employed in planning acts of vandalism, spotted subtle signs of wear that needed attention. Eleanor Martinez made calls to her extensive network of military families and supporters. By mid-afternoon, the warehouse had been opened for inspection. Years of neglect had left their mark, but the building's bones remained strong, much like the young men now planning its resurrection. "The main floor could be divided," Apex explained, his technical knowledge finding positive expression. "Reception area here, counseling rooms along the west wall, community space in the center." His hands, which hours ago had held spray paint, now sketched possibilities in a borrowed notebook. Nathan and Derek stood slightly apart examining the building's electrical panel. "Dad would have known exactly what to do," Nathan said softly. "He was always good with this stuff." "He taught me too," Derek replied, surprising them both. "Remember those summer jobs we did together? Him supervising, us thinking we knew everything?" The memory brought a ghost of a smile to his face. Maybe it's time to remember those lessons. Rebecca arrived with sandwiches and water, the simple act of breaking bread together carrying deeper significance. She watched as Frank shared his lunch break with the young men, decades of military experience flowing naturally into mentorship. "The VA's resource coordinator is interested," she announced, joining their informal circle. "Says if we can get the building up to code, they'll consider establishing regular services here. Medical screenings, benefit counseling, job placement assistance." The afternoon deepened as more community members arrived, drawn by calls and texts from those already present. A retired architect offered to draw up preliminary plans. A local contractor evaluated the HVAC system. Veterans from various eras shared stories of what the old warehouse had meant to them, painting a picture of what it could become again. "We'll need a name," Rook said suddenly, looking up from his growing list of repairs and requirements. Something that means something, not just another generic veterans center. The bridge, Apex suggested, cradling his sleeping nephew while his sister-in-law helped organize volunteer sign-up sheets. Because that's what it'll be, a bridge between military and civilian life, between past and future, between who we were and who we're becoming. The idea resonated, sparking further discussion about logos, mission statements, and community outreach. The rebels' skill at creating distinctive imagery could now serve a higher purpose, their understanding of social media and youth culture becoming assets rather than weapons. Colonel Parker watched it all with the experienced eye of a leader who had guided many young people through transformation. Remember, he cautioned during a quiet moment, this isn't about erasing who you were. It's about building on everything you've learned, even the hard lessons, to become who you need to be. As evening approached, Rebecca found Derek standing alone in what would become the center's main entrance. "Thinking about Sarah?" she asked gently. He nodded, running a hand along the wall's surface. "She never gave up on me, never stopped believing I could find my way back. Even when I was at my worst, she'd tell her doctors, 'My brother's a good man. He just forgot for a while.'" "She was right," Rebecca said simply. "And now you have the chance to prove it, not just to others, but to yourself." The day's last light filtered through dusty windows, illuminating the space where hope would soon replace emptiness, where purpose would overcome pain, where a different kind of rebellion, one of restoration and redemption, would take root and grow. The transformation had begun, but the real work still lay ahead. The next days, weeks, and months would test their commitment, challenge their resolve, and reveal whether this moment of change could become a lifetime of service. But for now, in the gathering dusk of a day that had begun with threats and ended with promises, the future looked brighter than any of them had dared to hope. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity as the bridge began taking shape. The transformation of both the building and its new caretakers deepened with each passing day. Derek, who once led his crew in acts of destruction, now coordinated construction teams with military precision, his natural leadership finding positive expression. Early morning light found the former rebels already at work, their motorcycles now carrying tools instead of spray paint. Hammer supervised structural repairs, his imposing presence reassuring rather than frightening as he directed volunteer crews. Rook's organizational skills proved invaluable in managing donations and supplies, while Apex's technical expertise brought the building's systems into the modern age. "We've got the VA inspection next week," Derek announced during their daily morning briefing, his leather jacket replaced by a work shirt bearing their new logo, a bridge spanning the gap between two cliffs with a military salute silhouetted against a rising sun. Everything needs to be perfect. Sarah, Derek's sister, had become a regular presence at the site, her wheelchair navigating the newly installed ramps with ease. "The physical therapy room is almost ready," she reported, pride evident in her voice. The equipment donations from Memorial Hospital arrived yesterday. Nathan, who spent every free moment between college classes at the center, looked up from his laptop. "Dad's old unit wants to help. They're organizing a fundraiser, something about a ruck march through veteran memorials across the state." The warehouse's transformation mirrored their own. The main floor now housed counseling offices, meeting rooms, and a spacious community area. The former loading dock had become a wheelchair-accessible entrance, complete with a memorial garden tended by Eleanor and her Gold Star Mothers group. "Got another call from the VA outreach program," Rebecca shared, arriving with coffee for the morning crew. "They want to expand their initial commitment: full-time counselor, weekly medical screenings, benefit coordination services." Frank, who had become a daily fixture at the site, nodded approvingly. Place is becoming what it always should have been: bridge between those who served and those who want to help. Colonel Parker's influence ensured everything met military standards of excellence. Under his guidance, the former rebels learned about chain of command, proper protocols, and the importance of sustainable support systems. Their street-smart adaptability combined with military precision created something unique. Different kind of rebellion, Apex remarked one afternoon, helping his nephew plant flowers in the memorial garden. Fighting against hopelessness instead of society. Harder battle but better cause. The community's response exceeded expectations. Local businesses provided materials and services. Veterans offered expertise and mentorship. Families shared stories that helped shape the center's programs. Even law enforcement, once their adversaries, became allies in their mission of redemption. "We've got the grand opening scheduled for Memorial Day," Rook announced, reviewing his meticulously organized timeline. 6 weeks to finish everything. Support groups want to start meeting here next month. VA's ready to begin services as soon as we get final approval. The transformation extended beyond the physical space. Each former rebel found their specific calling in service. Hammer discovered a talent for working with disabled veterans, his gentle strength providing both physical and emotional support. Rook excelled at coordinating resources and connecting veterans with needed services. Apex developed a computerized system for tracking assistance requests and volunteer availability. Sarah organized a peer support program for injured veterans, her own journey of recovery inspiring others. "Sometimes the best help comes from someone who's walked the same path," she explained during a planning session, "even if they stumbled along the way." Derek spent countless hours with Colonel Parker, learning about military culture, veteran needs, and effective leadership. "Leading people toward something," the colonel observed, "takes more skill than leading them against everything." Nathan found himself becoming a bridge between generations, his youth and personal experience helping him connect with young veterans struggling to readjust. His father's letter remained in his wallet, dog-eared and worn, a constant reminder of legacy and purpose. Rebecca watched it all with quiet satisfaction, seeing how the sacred ground of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery had catalyzed a transformation that would impact thousands of lives. The place where their confrontation began now served as a source of inspiration and remembrance. Eleanor Martinez brought her extensive network of military families into the fold, ensuring the bridge would serve not just veterans, but their entire support system. "Healing happens in community," she reminded them. "We're stronger together than alone." As the center neared completion, its impact already rippled through the community. Other cities requested information about replicating their model. Veteran organizations offered partnerships. The media, which once reported on rebel activities, now covered their redemption story. "You know what the real rebellion is?" Derek asked one evening as they finished installing the center's sign. "Going against who everyone thinks you have to be. Fighting for something instead of against everything." The bridge was becoming more than just a building or a program. It was becoming a symbol of transformation, a testament to the power of purpose, and a living memorial to the truth that it's never too late to choose a different path. The day of the bridge's final inspection arrived with a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. Dawn hadn't yet broken when Derek pulled up to the building, finding Nathan already there, meticulously checking every detail. The transformation of the once-abandoned warehouse stood as a testament to their own journey from destruction to restoration. "VA inspectors will be here at 9, Nathan reported, his father's folded letter visible in his shirt pocket, a constant reminder of purpose. "Colonel Parker's bringing the State Veteran Affairs Director with him. Congressman Mitchell confirmed he's attending the afternoon presentation." Throughout the morning, the former rebels moved with focused precision. Hammer conducted final safety checks on all the accessibility equipment, his massive frame now a source of comfort to the arriving veterans who came for the center's pilot programs. Rook reviewed the documentation for every service they planned to offer, his attention to detail now serving a higher purpose. "Medical suite passes all protocols," Sarah announced, having personally tested every piece of equipment from her wheelchair's perspective. "The therapists from the VA are impressed with the layout, said it's better than their main facility." Apex worked in the control room he'd designed, running diagnostics on the sophisticated communication and scheduling systems. His brother's photo hung above his workstation, watching over the skills now used to connect veterans with vital services. "Network's solid," he reported, "can coordinate with VA centers across the state." The building hummed with activity as volunteer staff arrived for their final briefing. Eleanor led the Gold Star family's support team, their understanding of loss and recovery adding crucial depth to the bridge's services. Rebecca coordinated with the medical professionals who would provide regular care, ensuring every veteran's needs would be met. "Remember," Derek addressed his team, standing in the main hall that would soon welcome its first official clients. "This isn't just about services or programs. It's about creating a place where everyone who walks through those doors feels understood, respected, and supported." Colonel Parker arrived early, his practiced eye noting every detail. "You've done more than rehabilitate a building," he observed, watching veterans already gathering outside, drawn by the promise of understanding. "You've created something entirely new, a true bridge between worlds." The inspection team moved through the facility with thorough precision. They examined the counseling rooms, designed to feel both professional and welcoming. They tested the state-of-the-art physical therapy equipment, noted the carefully planned spaces for group sessions and private consultations. "The memorial wall," one inspector commented, pausing before the carefully crafted tribute that spanned the main entrance. Names of fallen heroes, including Nathan's father and Apex's brother, were honored alongside photographs and service citations. "This connects everything, doesn't it?" Frank, who had taken personal responsibility for the building's grounds, proudly showed off the meditation garden. "Place for quiet reflection," he explained. "Sometimes healing needs silence as much as action." Local media arrived to document the center's inauguration, but found themselves capturing something deeper, a story of transformation that resonated far beyond their community. The cameras followed Sarah as she guided a tour through the rehabilitation facilities, her own journey from injury to advocacy, inspiring others. "We've got something special planned," Nathan told Rebecca quietly as the afternoon ceremony approached. "Sort of a surprise for Derek, if you can help coordinate it." The surprise revealed itself as vehicles began arriving from the VA hospital. Derek's sister's patients, the very people he'd been silently supporting during his years of pretending not to care. They came to show their support for the man who, despite his outward rebellion, had never missed driving his sister to their therapy sessions. "Your brother," one elderly veteran told Sarah, loud enough for Derek to hear. "He's been carrying our wheelchairs up the VA's broken ramp for years. Never said a word. Just did what needed doing. Knew there was more to him than that rebel act." The official ceremony began at sunset, the timing deliberate, bridging day and night, symbolizing transition and hope. The congressman spoke about community renewal. The VA director praised their innovative approach to veteran support. But the most powerful moment came from an unexpected source. A group of young veterans, recently returned from deployment, stood to speak about what the bridge meant to them. "We came back feeling lost," their spokesperson said, "caught between who we were and who we're supposed to be now. This place, it understands that journey. Because the people who built it have walked it themselves." Derek, listening from the back of the room, felt the weight of the moment. The rebellion that had defined him for so long had transformed into something far more powerful, the courage to help others find their way home. As night fell, the building's new sign illuminated for the first time, casting a warm glow over the gathered community. The bridge stood as more than just a veterans center. It had become a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of transformation and a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of rebellion involve choosing to serve rather than destroy. The journey that began with a confrontation in Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery had led to something none of them could have imagined, a place where broken spirits could heal, where lost souls could find direction, and where the true meaning of strength could be rediscovered, one story at a time. 6 months after the bridge's opening, the transformation had exceeded everyone's expectations. The former rebels gathered in the center's main hall for their weekly staff meeting, now joined by professional counselors, medical personnel, and veteran volunteers. The change in their appearance was as dramatic as the change in their purpose. Leather jackets replaced by polo shirts bearing the bridge's logo, their old patches of intimidation transformed into badges of service. "Latest numbers are in," Rook announced, pulling up his meticulously maintained database. We've served over 1,000 veterans in our first 6 months. Support groups running at full capacity. Medical services expanded to 5 days a week. Waiting list for the job training program. Derek, who now carried himself with the quiet authority of a true leader, nodded in satisfaction. State VAs requesting our operational model. 3 other cities want to implement similar programs. They're sending teams next week to study our approach. The success stories had begun piling up. Veterans who'd found hope within these walls, families who discovered support, young soldiers who'd located their path back to civilian life. Each triumph added another thread to the tapestry of redemption they were weaving. Sarah coordinated an expanding network of peer counselors, her wheelchair becoming a symbol of resilience rather than limitation. The rehabilitation program's exceeding projections, she reported. We've got veterans coming from 3 states for our specialized therapy sessions. Hammer had discovered his true calling in working with disabled veterans. His strength now gentle, his presence reassuring. Got the new adaptive sports program starting next month, he shared. Already have 30 participants signed up. Paralympic committees sending trainers. Nathan, balancing his college studies with his role at the center, had developed a unique program for children of fallen service members. Using Dad's letters as a template, he explained, helping kids understand their parents' sacrifice through stories and shared experiences. Colonel Parker, who had become a regular mentor at the bridge, watched with pride as his former adversaries evolved into community leaders. You've created something extraordinary here, he told them, a place that understands both the warrior and the wound. Rebecca's connection with the VA hospital had grown stronger, creating a seamless support system for veterans transitioning from medical care to community reintegration. The suicide prevention team reports a 40% decrease in crisis calls, she shared. They're attributing it directly to the Bridge's intervention programs. The memorial garden, now fully matured under Frank's careful attention, had become a place of peace and reflection. Gold Star families gathered there regularly, finding comfort in the beauty and understanding in each other's presence. Eleanor's support groups had expanded to include specialized sessions for siblings, children, and extended family members. Apex's technical expertise had created a model of efficiency. Our tracking system's being evaluated by the Department of Veterans Affairs, he announced proudly. They want to implement it nationally. Could help thousands more veterans connect with services. The warehouse that had almost become their rebel headquarters now served as a beacon of hope. Each room held stories of recovery. Each hallway echoed with conversations of healing. Each office witnessed moments of breakthrough and understanding. Got something to show you, Derek said after the meeting, leading the group to a newly completed wing. The walls were lined with photographs, not just of veterans and their families, but of the bridge's own journey. Images of their first day of construction, the inspection, the grand opening, and countless moments of service since then. Remember what we almost did? Nathan asked quietly, standing before a photo of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery. How close we came to destroying something sacred. Instead, we found our way home, Derek replied, his sister's hand finding his in silent support. Found our real purpose. The evening brought a special ceremony, the graduation of their first class of veteran peer counselors. Among them were former rebels from other cities, drawn by the story of transformation, seeking their own path to redemption through service. As the new counselors received their certifications, Rebecca watched from the back of the room, remembering that tense morning in the cemetery that had started it all. The sacred ground had become more than just a place of rest. It had become a catalyst for change, a reminder that even the most lost souls could find their way back to honor. Frank, standing beside her, nodded toward Derek as he addressed the graduates. Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought with weapons, the old veteran observed. Sometimes they're fought with understanding, with second chances, with the courage to change. The bridge had become more than just a veterans center. It was a testament to the power of transformation, a living memorial to the truth that purpose could overcome pain, that service could heal what rebellion had broken, that it's never too late to choose a different path. As night fell over the facility, its windows glowing with warmth and welcome, The former rebels stood together, no longer fighting against the world, but working to heal it. One veteran, one family, one story at a time. Their journey from destruction to restoration had become a beacon of hope for others seeking their way home. The impact of their transformation reached far beyond the center's walls. Local law enforcement reported a significant drop in youth gang activity, as the Bridges story inspired other lost souls to seek purpose through service. Schools invited Derek and his team to speak about redemption and responsibility. Military recruiters noticed an uptick in qualified candidates, many citing the Bridge as their inspiration to serve. "We're not just helping veterans," Eleanor observed during the graduation reception. "We're changing how the community sees service, sacrifice, and the possibility of change." The graduates mingled with their families and mentors, each wearing the Bridges insignia alongside their service branch's pins. Their stories of struggle and redemption echoed those of their mentors, creating a continuing cycle of healing and hope. As the celebration continued, Colonel Parker pulled Derek aside. "The Secretary of Veterans Affairs is coming next month," he revealed. "Wants to see firsthand what makes this place different. Why it works when so many other programs struggle." Derek looked around at what they'd built, not just the facility, but the community, the understanding, the bridge between who they were and who they'd become. "It works because we understand both sides," he said simply. "The darkness and the light, the struggle and the victory." The transformation that began in a cemetery had grown into something none of them could have imagined, a movement of hope, a testament to the power of purpose, and a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal when treated with understanding, respect, and the opportunity to serve something greater than oneself. 1 year after that fateful morning at Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery, Rebecca Thorne stood before a gathered crowd at the Bridges' first anniversary celebration. The transformation around her seemed almost miraculous. The once abandoned warehouse now stood as a beacon of hope, its walls echoing with stories of healing and redemption. "If you had told me a year ago that a confrontation with rebels in the cemetery would lead to this," she began, gesturing to the vibrant community center around them, "I wouldn't have believed it. But sometimes the greatest changes come from the most unexpected moments." The ceremony was being broadcast live across multiple veterans networks, the Bridge having become a model for similar programs nationwide. Derek, dressed in a suit that would have been unimaginable in his rebel days, stood at the podium alongside Senator Harris, who had championed their program through federal channels. "The Department of Veterans Affairs is proud to announce," the senator declared, "the nationwide adoption of the Bridge Initiative. 10 new centers will open across the country in the next year, each one following the unique model of rehabilitation and redemption pioneered here." Sarah, now the director of peer support services, led tours through the expanded facility. The physical therapy wing had doubled in size, featuring state-of-the-art equipment and innovative programs. The memorial garden had become a healing sanctuary, its paths lined with plaques honoring both fallen heroes and successful recoveries. "We've served over 5,000 veterans this year," Rook reported, his organizational skills having earned him a position as National Program Coordinator. "But more importantly, we've created a template that can be replicated anywhere there's a need and willing hearts." Hammer's adaptive sports program had produced 3 Paralympic athletes, with more in training. "It's not about what you can't do," he told a group of newly injured veterans. "It's about discovering what you can do, and then doing it with everything you've got." Nathan, now completing his degree in counseling psychology, had expanded the children's program to include adventure therapy and artistic expression. "Every kid who walks through these doors," he explained, "carries a hero's legacy. We help them understand and honor that legacy." The transformation of the former rebels had become legendary in veteran support circles. Apex's technical innovations were being implemented at VA facilities across the country. His tracking system had revolutionized how veterans connected with services, earning him recognition from the highest levels of government. Colonel Parker, watching the ceremonies with pride, remembered the turning point in the cemetery. Sometimes the best soldiers, he mused, are the ones who had to fight their way back to honor. They understand the struggle in a way others can't. Eleanor Martinez had expanded the Gold Star Families Network, connecting groups across the nation through the Bridges support system. Grief shared is grief halved, she often said, and purpose found is life renewed. Frank, still tending the grounds with military precision, had trained a new generation of caretakers, troubled youth finding direction through service to veterans. The garden grows more than flowers, he'd tell them. It grows understanding, respect, purpose. The evening's highlight came when Derek unveiled the new wing dedicated to preventive intervention, programs designed to catch struggling veterans before crisis hit. "We're not just building bridges," he announced. "We are preventing the gaps from forming in the first place." The Secretary of Veterans Affairs, attending in person, presented the bridge with the highest civilian honor for veteran support services. "What makes this program unique," he observed, "is its understanding that healing happens best when guided by those who've walked both sides of the path." Rebecca watched as the former rebels, now respected community leaders, accepted the honor with humility and purpose. The journey that began with a confrontation had transformed not just individuals, but an entire approach to veteran support and rehabilitation. "The real power of the bridge," Derek explained to the national audience, "isn't in our programs or facilities. It's in the understanding that everyone deserves a chance to find their way back to purpose. Everyone has the capacity to transform destruction into creation, rebellion into service." As night fell, the center's lights illuminated the grounds, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Veterans young and old, families bearing both grief and hope, community members and national leaders, all stood witness to the power of transformation. Sarah, watching her brother address the crowd, remembered the long years of his internal struggle, his silent support during her recovery, his journey from darkness to light. "Sometimes," she whispered to Rebecca, "the longest bridge is the one from who we are to who we're meant to be." The bridge stood as more than just a veterans center. It had become a symbol of the endless possibilities that arise when people choose service over destruction, understanding over judgment, hope over despair. The sacred ground of Evergreen Veterans Memorial Cemetery, where it all began, had catalyzed a movement that would continue changing lives for generations to come. As the anniversary celebration concluded, Rebecca returned to the cemetery, standing before Captain Thorne's grave in the quiet evening light. "You would be proud," she said, softly, touching the marble marker. "Your sacrifice helped create something beautiful, something that brings light to those lost in darkness, hope to those caught in despair, and purpose to those seeking their way home." The transformation was complete, but its impact would continue rippling outward, touching countless lives, healing countless hearts, building countless bridges between who people were and who they could become. In the end, the greatest rebellion had been against darkness itself, and the greatest victory had been the discovery that it's never too late to choose the path of light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.